this Niners defense, I can't speak for sure to say they only had 3 plays in their playbook, but it sure as hell looked like it. It looked very similar, right? Because they walk out there on the field and they say, hey, we know you know what we're going to do, but we dare you to fucking try and beat it. And teams that tried to beat it couldn't. Alrighty, welcome everybody back to another video here on the channel. If you don't know who I am by now, my name is David. I also go by Miller Football, and I am currently doing a series here on this channel where I'm going through all 32 teams, talking about what happened to them last year, what their off seasons were like, and what our expectations are for them in this upcoming season. And of course, as a Bears fan, I can't give full insight on all 32 teams, so I've been joined by guests, fans of every single team. And every once in a while, the guy below me, Mr. No Huddle NFL, who I hate because he has no actual loyalties, but he knows ball, so it's close enough. And by the way, I have to point it out, we were talking about it before the show started. That man is holding his microphone together with a rubber band, so please go in the comments and point and laugh at his ratchet setup.
It's just the
mic boom. Close enough.
Right.
It's still the microphone. And then to my right, we have an actual 49ers fan, a very good friend of mine, a lifelong, or not lifelong, it feels like lifelong, but someone I've been friends with for quite a few years now. Good Lord, I cannot talk. The man, the myth, the legend, Brian Luong, who is, like I said, an actual 49ers fan. So before we dive into this, fellas, how are we doing today?
Doing good.
I'm good. I'm recording from Delaware. That's the only reason I don't have a jersey on me. I'm not sure what jersey I would wear for this one because my dad's a Giants fan, so I'm not allowed to have a 49ers jersey. It's that
so your dad
Eagles
sucks.
and Cowboys. Yeah.
Respectfully.
Yeah, respectfully, of course. But yeah, I'm recording from Delaware. I'm in my parents' bedroom because nowhere else in the house has Wi-Fi. So that's great. But besides that, it's been a great trip.
Fair enough. Yeah, shout out to this guy for coming on here mid-vacation to come talk about the 49ers and everything going on with them despite not being a 49ers fan.
I can't keep sending the break glass in case of emergency if I'm not actually here for every emergency.
That's fair. Because, I mean, that's what has happened. The 3 times I've had you on, it has been a complete and total emergency where, ironically, very vocal fan bases don't want to show up for their teams. And I've had to bring this guy on, and it'll probably happen again because trying to cram 20-ish videos into a month is tough. And scheduling is even tougher. And much like myself, Patrick has no social life. But anyways, jumping on into talking about the 49ers, this question might be a little more geared towards Brian, but Patrick, you can obviously give your insight here. Obviously, we are a few months removed from the NFC Championship game where the 49ers went out, fought a very valiant effort despite not having a single healthy quarterback on the roster by the time the game ended. So just what are your thoughts on that as a whole, just that game in particular?
Are we talking about the NFC Championship game against the Eagles?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That was a tough game to watch, obviously. We came in with a lot of momentum. Brock Purdy, obviously, the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Irrelevant, came in 5-0 in the regular season. Took down Seattle, took down Dallas, and then here we are against the Eagles. And I don't know, it was a heartbreaking game to watch. Just seeing them go down and being so helpless. Obviously, just watching us deteriorating after what was a spectacular season, in my point of view, at least, as a 49ers fan. And going down to Josh Johnson and even having Christian McCaffrey running around out there trying to figure things out. It was just helpless watching the game as a Niners fan, and you just wanted it to be over. It was heartbreaking.
I can only imagine how much that would suck being a fan of a team that, in all honesty, I think would have won the Super Bowl, assuming their quarterback, the most important position, stays healthy. Maybe they don't win it, but they definitely would have won that game. I still think they were a really good matchup against the Eagles. So I can only imagine how much that would have sucked watching that team, rooting for them, and then seeing them lose because of injury, right? Because that's why they lost. It wasn't, oh, the Eagles were a better team, it was fair and square. No, they didn't just lose one of their quarterbacks. They lost him and then Josh Johnson. And they were running Wildcat. They didn't have another choice. So it wasn't they got out-schemed or, Kyle Shanahan has to do a better job, building his offense without his quarterback. No, they couldn't even build it with a quarterback, and that's just simply unfair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for pointing that out, because you open up a YouTube comment section or a TikTok comment section, and it's just Niners fans, Eagles fans battling it out, and Eagles fans are always, no disrespect, but they're pretty loud out there. They give us a ton of shit for that, and it's just really frustrating because, quite frankly, we had no chance with no signal caller back there, and if only people would realize that. It was difficult to watch.
Yeah. I just want to throw it out there. You experienced one game of what I've experienced for about 18 years of my life. So now you know the pain of not having a quarterback. No, but in all seriousness, like Patrick put it perfectly, you had what was essentially a modern NFL super team, right? You had the best defense in football. Your offense was loaded from top to bottom. You have one of the greatest offensive minds any of us have seen in our lifetimes running this ship. And then your quarterback goes down. And then your journeyman XFL legend quarterback goes down as the backup. And you're stuck running a running back at quarterback. And I mean, you can't do anything at that point. You are completely shit out of luck at that point. So it's definitely tough to watch. As somebody that roots for the 49ers pretty openly, like they are my quote unquote second team. They're the team that if the Bears aren't in the playoffs, which let's face it is pretty much every year, they're the team that I'm pulling for. They're the team I'm rooting for. And we'll get into that. If you know me, you know exactly why, but we'll get into that here a little bit. But again, the big point here is the quarterback position. And that has continued into the offseason and continued into training camp, where the quarterback position is kind of an issue. Yet the 49ers, for the most part, have stayed pretty well intact, right? They lost their defensive coordinator. They replaced him with a guy that I think is going to do great. And again, we'll talk about him more in depth later. But the big issue remains, what do the 49ers do at quarterback? And maybe as a 49ers fan, Brian, you have a much clearer view on this. You know there's a specific guy that it needs to be. But myself and Patrick, I don't know where you stand, but me and you are pretty similar with things, so I would assume you're probably with me. It's a little less black and white. So just as a whole right now, what are your thoughts on the 49ers quarterback situation headed into the year? Like, who do you think should be the guy? Do you think there's a chance that it's none of them? Do you think there's a chance that any one of them could be the guy? Just what are your thoughts?
Well, right now, from the ways that things are looking, Brock Purdy is the clear-cut leader in the locker room right now. Kyle Shanahan has said it himself. Even with the injury coming off of the torn UCL, Brock Purdy is the clear-cut leader, and it's his job to lose. Obviously, Trey, we gave up a lot of draft capital to get him. We have a pretty stacked QB room. Sam Darnold as well in the mix, fighting for that backup position. But how I see it is that we're sort of riding the hot hand right now. Brock Purdy has proved that he could execute this 49ers offense. And when you have Kyle Shanahan as your head coach, it's yours to screw up. I mean, we've had quarterbacks in the past, obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo. He did us a great service, and I'm very appreciative to him, unlike other Niners fans out there. But prior to that, we also had quarterbacks like, let's say, Brian Hoyer, Nick Mullins, who didn't give us that much success either. But Brock Purdy came in here as Mr. Irrelevant, no expectations whatsoever, and in my eyes, outperformed. And I feel like we should ride the hot hand, and it is his job to lose, and we'll see how it plays out throughout preseason or into the season.
By the way, I just think that this was a almost mind-blowing stat, just considering that Brock Purdy was the Mr. Irrelevant of last year's draft. The 49ers went from 22 points per game in the first 11 games of the season. And then when the Dolphins game happened in week 13 and Garoppolo went down, Purdy came in. From that point forward, they averaged 33 points per game, 33.5, which is an 11-point difference. So it's safe to say, even if it's not completely because of Purdy, he executes the offense well enough for it to still be a unit. So
Sure.
even if Purdy isn't the starting quarterback, that means that either Lance or Darnold is playing better than him, because Shanahan isn't an idiot. He's not going to play a quarterback that's worse than the other guy. So assuming that the entire quarterback room stays healthy, I have a lot of confidence in the quarterback play on this offense. Because, again, they're not going to start Darnold unless he's better than Purdy. They're not going to start Lance unless he's better than Purdy. And we know this offense is still really, really, really good with Purdy there. Is it completely because of Purdy? Maybe not. But does it really matter? No. Points are points.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I will say, I am somebody who, despite my love for the 49ers, is pretty outspoken in not being a big Brock Purdy fan. And it's nothing against the kid. I say kid, he's older than I am, but you get the point. He's a young quarterback. I got to stop doing that. I really have a problem with that. I'm 20 and I'm calling 24, 25-year-olds kid because I hear everyone else call them kids. But anyways, it's nothing against him, right? Brian made a great point. He comes in, 0 expectations. He's Mr. Freaking Irrelevant, wins 5 straight games, takes the team to the NFC or goes with the team to the NFC Championship, right? That in itself is a fantastic accomplishment. And I commend Brock Purdy for pulling that off, because it's not like he was out there fumbling the ball every play or throwing passes wildly off target and everyone else had to pick up the slack. Like Purdy, was executing the offense at least an adequate level on his end. Was he elevated by the talent around him? Absolutely. But again, he was Mr. Irrelevant. That's going to happen. No one expects Mr. Irrelevant to come in and look like Prime Brady. That's not how that works. So for me, I'm starting to agree with Purdy being the starter in San Fran. The more I think about it, and the more I think, okay, as Patrick pointed out, Shanahan's going to start the guy who runs his offense the best, because that's what Shanahan is. He's looking for a game manager quarterback that can fit his system, just operate adequately and let the guys around him take over. And he's got plenty of guys to take over. You've got Kittle, you've got Debo, you've got Ayuk, you've got McCaffrey, you've got Juszczyk, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. Plenty of playmakers in that offense. So I do agree that at this point in time, Purdy should be the clear-cut starter. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least point out what the other two bring to the table, right? Because you've got Trey Lance. You traded all the way up to get him at the 3rd overall pick. Came out, we knew he was raw. We knew he was going to be somebody that couldn't start right away, that needed a little bit of time to sit and develop and, kind of bake behind Jimmy Garoppolo. And he got a little bit of that year 1. You want him to be the starter year 2. He comes out, gets hurt in the first real game he plays, because that first game against the Bears was in a goddamn monsoon, and I refuse to hold that loss against him because it's really hard to evaluate a quarterback playing in those conditions. So he didn't get a fair shot, and he's still a guy with a ton of talent that I think, if developed correctly, which, I have all the faith in the world that Shanahan can develop him, can be a superstar in the league. And then you have Sam Darnold, who I know has been kind of a punching bag the last couple of years, but you listen to what Shanahan had to say about him right after he got signed, and you'd think he was Shanahan's ideal starter for next year, the way he was hyping him up, saying he's one of the best quarterbacks for his system he's seen, how accurate he is, how smart he is, all this different stuff. So the Niners are in this weird spot where I legitimately think you can make an argument for all 3 quarterbacks starting. And I know the old saying, Coach John Madden, may he rest in peace. If you have 2 quarterbacks, you've got none, right? If you have 3 quarterbacks, God only knows what Coach Madden would have to say. But I do think, because of everything else the Niners have, and the fact that they have a guy that can at least game manage at a rather efficient level, as Patrick pointed out, the offense got better and scored more points when he was on the field. Then I think, even as somebody who is one of Brock Purdy's biggest critics, again, not because of him, more because of the narratives that spun around him and the commentary that came from it. Like, I'll never forget when I saw a graphic that was trying to argue that Brock Purdy was a better quarterback than Dak Prescott. That is still one of the most insane things I have ever seen. But that being said, I have a lot of faith in Shanahan, and I think because of the amount of faith in Shanahan I have, I'm kind of okay with whoever starting at quarterback, as long as they can game manage at a consistent level, and Purdy can absolutely do that.
I'm just curious, Brian. Now, throwing hindsight into the wind, what did you initially think of the entire acquisition of Lance and what they did in order to get him?
So let's go back to when we initially drafted Lance. We traded up and gave away a lot of draft capital. And for our fan base as a whole, I feel like the reaction was somewhat neutral to positive. People liked that move, and we were sort of invested in Lance for the future. And that was when we still had Jimmy Garoppolo on the roster. And he was sort of, fluttering around possibly being traded or whatnot. But he ended up starting that season. And so I'm just trying to go back in time right now. But we didn't get that much of a sample size from Trey Lance. He went down against Seattle. I remember that. I think he was only able to start 3 to 4 games. Just to put that up in comparison, Purdy was able to start 5 games throughout the regular season and then some in the playoffs. Now that I think about it, Sam Darnold is actually our most experienced quarterback on the roster, and that's kind of mind-blowing. So if we had to go back in time and just look at that in hindsight, we believed in Trey Lance. We were invested in his future. Obviously, we had other quarterbacks on the roster. Jimmy Garoppolo was there. He went down. Jimmy Garoppolo reclaimed the starting role, and we rolled with them. And then, obviously, all the events of last season came down, and now Brock Purdy is arguably our starter right now. It's a difficult situation to say. It's a very difficult situation to say what we do. People have thrown around maybe trading him away, lots of different options. But I like what you said earlier, Patrick, about how, let's say, the Brock Purdy experiment doesn't work out. I have full faith in Trey. I have full faith in Sam and what they can do under a Shanahan offense. They need to execute our scheme. They need to limit mistakes. They just need to be an efficient game manager, and we'll win games. So let's put it that way. I'm confident in the quarterback room. And yes, we traded up a lot of draft capital to get Trey, and all of that could seemingly be going to waste if another quarterback ends up starting and wasting Trey's years. But how I see it is that we're here to win games, and if that means we were going to win the Super Bowl or advance further going into the next few years, that's all right to me.
Yeah.
Spoken
Sorry,
like a true NFL
sidetrack
GM.
there. Yeah, I had
The
to
way
think
that you're
a lot about
avoiding
it.
saying that Lance is, at this point,
That's
hasn't
probably
lived
what
up to
John Lynch
expectation.
was having to do the entire time,
Oh, it
because
was.
I
Absolutely.
had to think about that a lot. Just going back in time, thinking about what I thought then and then what I thought now, and putting that all together. That was a real good question.
That was the most diplomatic way to answer it as well. That was fantastic.
You had me thinking harder than I've ever thought in like a college class. Like, to be completely honest with
you. I love it. See, Patrick and I, we're thought provokers.
You guys are really you're making me think right now. You're making me
straight.
Think.
Personally, I could at least tell you what I thought back then. I haven't seen enough of Trey Lance, neither has anyone except for the 49ers coaching staff, to say that he's definitively a bad quarterback or something like that. But the fact he isn't definitively the starter yet or definitively ahead of Sam Darnold is worrying. But besides that, at the time, I really thought because of, let's just be honest, relative to other offenses, the Shanahan offense is easier on the quarterback. So because of that, even if he didn't start year 1, even if he didn't start year 2, I really thought he would still be able to understand the offense enough to execute how they desire it to be executed. Because again, a Mr. Irrelevant rookie could execute it. Give Trey Lance 2 years, he should be able to get it, even though he went to North Dakota State and didn't play against the highest caliber competition. He should be able to understand it 1 or 2 years in. So the hope would have been, or what I imagine the hope would have been, was Lance eventually learns the offense. And then when he learns it, you put him in and he has the physical tools to be this great quarterback. So even if he doesn't study the game or know the game to the level that a Tom Brady did or a Drew Brees did, the physical ability would still add something beyond what Brock Purdy could do, or just someone that could execute could. So even if he didn't mentally understand at an elite level, he could still at least be somewhat close to an elite quarterback because of the tools he has.
Absolutely.
At least that's what I think the thought process was. So at the time, I liked it, but it's easy to say now with hindsight, it hasn't really lived up to that expectation.
Yeah. I mean, you take the most boomer bust quarterback in that class. Like a lot of people had Lance as, QB3, QB4 in that class. Obviously, the Niners passed on guys like Justin Fields, which thank you for doing so. But no, like it's definitely interesting to look at the situation in hindsight, right? You have this team who had a quarterback, even if he's not the greatest, who was executing their offense at a solid level. They trade up, take a risk on a kid with a lot of athletic upside, like Patrick mentioned. And as of right now, it hasn't worked out. But listen, here's the thing, right? If the Purdy experiment works, the Niners win the Super Bowl, who the fuck cares, right? You took a swing, you missed, whatever. I think the Niners have done enough good with this current regime with John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan and all the other guys that you can look at that as an attempt at something that was really a worthwhile attempt. It wasn't like this was some crazy out of the box, like tinfoil hat type move. This was okay. We want something different. We want somebody who's the opposite of Jimmy G. They probably heard rumblings that team X, Y, and Z wanted Lance, so they give up a lot to jump up for him and hopefully land him, and they get him, right? I think it was a fine move, even if we're looking in hindsight. I know a lot of people like to be couch GMs, be like, well, if I had that pick, I would have taken Micah Parsons, or I would have taken this guy or this guy. Who knows what any of those guys would have been in San Fran, right? Mike Parsons might be the exception because you put a linebacker with the best linebacker development group ever, and maybe that goes crazy, but quarterback's more valuable than linebacker, so at least you got that going, right? So I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world to look at it in hindsight. Like, it's definitely interesting to consider, but I still think it was a good move by the Niners. Even now, even if Lance doesn't work out, I think it was worthwhile. I think it was a risk worth taking, is what I'm trying to say here.
Definitely.
I think
but jumping
that's
off,
wonderfully put.
thank you. But jumping off of that, stroking my ego over here, I love it. But jumping off of that and going into the regular season, just kind of looking at the 49ers record-wise as a base to start with, 13-4, first in the NFC West, 8-1 at home, 5-3 on the road, and as Brian has already mentioned, 5-0 in their last 5 games thanks to Mr. Irrelevant Brock Purdy. But another player that really gave the Niners a jump start during the season was Christian McCaffrey, who they traded for at midseason. I'll never forget when the trade broke. Was it during or right after Thursday Night Football that the trade broke? I can't remember if it was like at the end of the game or if it was right after. Either way, it was a Thursday night, pretty late. We found out the Niners gave up a weird amount of draft picks in a slightly odd trade for Christian McCaffrey, which, looking at it in hindsight, definitely worked out. But with all of the current rumblings about running backs and how they're getting paid and what their value and worth is, out of curiosity, Brian, are you happy that the Niners traded for McCaffrey, gave up multiple draft picks, and ended up paying him, or not paying him, but taking on his contract? Or would you have rather just stuck with the good old reliable Shanahan? We'll just have 5 running backs and one of them will be healthy at some point and can probably pick up 8 yards.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. Our running back core is already really stacked. I mean, we have guys like Elijah Mitchell, Jordan Mason, who I want to see more of, and other guys that I want to see more of excel. But I remember when we traded for Christian McCaffrey, and like you said, it was I don't know if it was before, during, after. It was on Thursday night, and I was still in college, so we were in a dorm room, and then my friend who's a Seahawks fan, he came running over. I didn't get the news yet. He started pounding on my door. He was like, bro, did you hear the news? And I was like, no, what news? And yet I found out that Christian McCaffrey was a Niner, and I was ecstatic. He brought a whole nother sort of depth to our offense. Even if he wasn't the focal point on a specific play, he would attract defenders away from other stars and allow them to make plays themselves. Christian McCaffrey sort of disrupts the field in that way, where you're always going to have someone have an eye on him. And if you don't keep an eye on him, something bad's going to happen. So having that sort of security blanket in the backfield and having someone who's reliable, obviously he's had a few injury bugs in the past, and that's, let's just say, for the whole entire Niners team as a whole. But just having Christian McCaffrey in the backfield complementing our other backs and just complimenting our other superstars on this offense, I feel like should give every Niners fan out there a lot of confidence.
I also love how they use CMC sparingly in order to avoid the injuries that riddled his career on the Panthers, right? The great thing about how Shanahan and how the 49ers overall are using McCaffrey is they don't need McCaffrey necessarily, but in the situations, it's a crucial third down. Okay, now let's put McCaffrey in the game. But on the average down, okay, Elijah Mitchell. We still have the most creative run blocking scheme in the entire NFL. You'll still get 5 yards, 6 yards. It doesn't really matter who we have back there. And because of that, they don't feel a need to waste McCaffrey.
Yeah, absolutely. I love McCaffrey. He's just such a fun football player to watch. And I've talked about this at length, whether it's in private conversations, on this YouTube channel, on TikTok, on Twitter, about how the whole running back market situation doesn't apply to a guy like McCaffrey. Because Christian McCaffrey is not a running back. He is inverse Deebo Samuel, where he's like, instead of a wide back, he's like a running receiver, I guess, would be the inverse of that, right? Where he's this hybrid player that can do a little bit of everything for your offense. Hell, he had a passing touchdown last year. Like, he had a hat trick where he ran for one, threw for one, and caught one in the same game. So you're looking at a guy who is less of a pure running back and more of just a weapon. And sure, you gave up a second, a third, a fourth, and a future fifth for him. And you look at that nowadays, you give that up for a running back, people are like, what the fuck are you doing? You can take a guy in the 6th round, he's going to give you the same production. There's not a single running back in the NFL that is anything like Christian McCaffrey. Jahmyr Gibbs is the closest thing you've got, and even then, I don't think he's as good of a pure runner as McCaffrey is, because you've got this running back that can line up as a receiver, be a legitimately threatening route runner, create separation, be a mismatch for linebackers and safeties and even nickel corners, and hell, some boundary corners if you really want to, or if we really want to push it. Like, he's this insane playmaker. And as Bryan mentioned, he's somebody that demands a lot of attention. So when McCaffrey's on the field, you got to take attention off of one of George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, Kyle Juszczyk, Jawan Jennings, whoever. And then somebody's going to get open. You're going to be able to make a play because all of those guys are able to make plays with the ball in their hands. And it just makes this offense much more dynamic. You give Shanahan all these weapons, and he's, as I've already mentioned, one of the best offensive minds we've seen in our lifetimes. Definitely he's the most creative offensive mind I've seen in my lifetime. I will die on that hill. So you see all these different toys, all these different weapons he has to work with. McCaffrey, arguably the most dynamic out of all of them. And again, the quarterback situation becomes a little less important because of weapons like this. So I know that was kind of an obvious question, being like, was trading for McCaffrey good? Yeah, of course it was good. Anyone who disagrees with it is probably a little ignorant to what he brings to the table. But I wanted to bring it up because it's such, it's so topically relevant, right? With everything going on with running backs. And, Patrick and I have talked about this between him and I, that might be the next step for NFL running backs, is becoming more like McCaffrey when you're in, high school and college. Instead of changing positions like I've seen some people advocate for, be a McCaffrey. Learn how to run a route. Learn how to catch a pass. That's the next step for running backs. Either that or you go the Bijan Robinson route and just be perfect. But that's a little more difficult.
This offseason wasn't the offseason that killed the running back market. I feel like I've said this word for word with you on my podcast, right? I also find it funny, right once the Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs no deals happened, we both made TikToks saying pretty much the same exact thing. Yeah. This offseason didn't kill the running back market. It's just the offseason that changed the running back market. The
No.
Nick Chubbs of the world, the Derrick Henrys of the world, the Josh Jacobs of the world, especially, aren't going to be getting these large deals. But there's still a reason that Bijan Robinson went in the top 10 this year. There's still a reason that Jahmyr Gibbs was a first-round pick, picked in the top 15. It's because he isn't just a running back. Teams don't not value running backs at all. They just only really value the running backs that have these exclusive skill sets of being receivers that could also run the ball really well. Those are the guys that get paid. And Christian McCaffrey is one of those guys, and that's why he got paid.
Yeah, for sure. And then, like Bryan mentioned and Patrick also mentioned, kind of combining your 2 points there, the fact that the Niners have this luxury of not having to abuse and beat McCaffrey into the ground like the Panthers had to when he was their entire offense. They can bring him on the field whenever they want and still have not only a legitimate run game, but they have a couple guys who can still catch the ball out of the backfield pretty effectively. Sure, they're not lining Elijah Mitchell or Jordan Mason out wide, but they can catch a screen. They can catch a ball in the flat. They can do something. They can turn upfield, make a play out of it. McCaffrey is like the definition of a luxury item for the Niners, but he was a luxury item that they turned into a necessity and a core point of their offense. And I think that's the beauty of Kyle Shanahan as a whole right there.
There's a lot of beauty of Kyle Shanahan.
Everything Kyle Shanahan does is beautiful.
I am the number one Kyle Shanahan meat rider. Okay.
No, you're not. I will tell you with full confidence you're not. It's me. Let's be real here. Let's.
I have like a solid page of notes right now, just waiting to come out for the Kyle.
You need
Shanahan
notes. That's what I thought. Mine's all in here, and more importantly, in here. I might have just pointed at my lungs. I suck at anatomy, but they're in my chest somewhere. But jumping off of that and just looking at some of the numbers from last year, specifically EPA per play and scoring. Those are two stat categories that I've been looking at heavily for this series, just to give like a basic numerical idea of where the teams stood in different aspects of the game, right? Starting off the EPA per play, they were 20th in rushing, which is quite ironic considering how much we rave about Kyle Shanahan and his run game, and these running backs on this team weren't necessarily the most efficient runners of the football. Third in passing EPA per play. Second in run defense, fourth in coverage, and then jumping over to points, they were sixth in points scored, first in points allowed, and first in point differential. So, in other words, the Niners defense is really fucking good at football. And that's not a surprise to anybody. If you turned on even 5 seconds of a 49ers game last year, you may or may not have witnessed a murder. If not, you at least witnessed a very well executed run defense blow up a running back in the backfield. So talking about the scheme, that's kind of where I want to start, is talking about the defense. And obviously there's going to be a big change this year because DeMeco Ryans has left and moved on to the Houston Texans to be the head coach. So just kind of my first question here when we're getting into scheme, how much do we think the departure of DeMeco Ryans is going to impact this team as a whole, and obviously more specifically the defense?
I think that's a great question because we've had we're very thankful to have had very solid defensive coordinators in the past. Rob Saleh, leading that 2019 team that went to the Super Bowl. He's with the Jets now, and then DeMeco Ryans off to the Texans, and now we have Steve Wilks. I feel like we have such a great core defense that have passed down what they've learned from previous defensive coordinators and previous players, such as veteran mentors. We had Richard Sherman, Uncle Sherm, and other players as well. And I feel like this defense is just very well-rounded and that they adjust very well to Steve Wilks' new scheme. And I anticipate that they're going to utilize the blitz more often, something that we haven't done as much compared to other teams, I believe. I'm not sure the statistics around that, but that's something I'm very excited to see. And just going a little off track here, the addition of Javon Hargrave and just the question about who's going to start opposite to Nick Bosa, whether it be Drake Jackson or Cleveland Farrell. I feel like this is just a very well-rounded defense where if there are any questions, there's always going to be some sort of answer that we're going to figure out soon. And it's not really a question where it's going to be lethal or something super that's something that's going to wreck this defense or whatnot. I feel like we are so well rounded that we'd be fine under any circumstances, and I'm more so excited for what Steve Wilkes is going to bring to this defense.
So I'm not necessarily saying that the change from D'Amico Ryans to Steve Wilkes is a bad thing, because they both are great defensive minds. But the impact is definitely going to be felt. There is a huge change that's going underway here, right? The Steve Wilkes defense isn't the polar opposite of the D'Amico Ryans defense, but it is very, very different. It's less of a coverage-based defense, which is ironic because they run more nickel, right? They run a 4-2-5 more than the 49ers did. The 49ers like to run more of a base 4-3 because they prioritized defending the run. But the Steve Wilkes defense, like you said, they blitz more. It's an indisputable fact. They like to blitz. Steve Wilkes, that's a big part of his ideology, to get to the quarterback, to blitz, to send guys towards the line of scrimmage. And I think that could work. It definitely could. I have faith in Dre Greenlaw as a blitzer if they choose to use him that way. I think he has the physical tools to be that type of guy. And they did lose Azeez Al-Shaair, so maybe it's better that they're making this shift. But at the same time, it still is just such a huge difference. Fred Warner is a great inside linebacker, especially great in coverage. So I don't think it's a bad thing. Again, maybe this might be a better thing for them, but there is a huge learning curve. That's an indisputable fact. When you're changing just your base defensive personnel package, a difference is definitely going to be felt all over the team. And again, it's probably going to be good for them, but there is going to be a bit of a learning curve here.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Something I like to point out, Patrick kind of illustrated and Brian alluded to it, that Steve Wilkes' defense is pretty aggressive, especially when it comes to blitzing, right? They like to do whatever they can to get in the backfield and get to the quarterback. Whereas I will go as far to say the front seven's approach to football, at least, is going to be the polar opposite from where it was last year. Because the D'Amico Ryans defense, at least with all of the talent he had last year, was very, very reminiscent of the Bears of the early 2000s and the mid 2000s with Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs. All these great defensive players. Those are the main two because the linebackers are the biggest deal, right? Where it's not this super exotic, aggressive defense. It's essentially them sitting in the same couple of packages. Like Brian Urlacher will tell you about the Bears. They had 3 plays in their playbook, and it worked. This Niners defense, I can't speak for sure to say they only had 3 plays in their playbook, but it sure as hell looked like it. It looked very similar, right? Because they walk out there on the field and they say, hey, we know you know what we're going to do, but we dare you to fucking try and beat it. And teams that tried to beat it couldn't. That's the beauty of the 49ers defense. It was executed very simply and very well. Because that defense, like I said, very much just beat us. Do it. I fucking dare you. I know I just repeated myself, but that is how apparent that was for that defense. And I loved it. It's awesome to watch a defense just be better than an offense, especially in the modern NFL. Whereas Steve Wilkes is very much like, we've got guys. They're hoopers. They're great. But we're still going to send them at you because fuck you. Right? It's still very much a fuck you defense, but in a different way. And I'm really, really excited to see what that's going to look like next year. Like Patrick mentioned, watching, oh my God, why is his name escaping me? The other, the other amazing
Azeez
linebacker they have.
No,
the one that's still on the roster.
Dre Greenlaw.
Dre Greenlaw. Jesus, thank you. Sorry, I had Brian Urlacher and Lance Briggs on the mind, and my brain was just rolling highlights of those two. Yeah, Dre Greenlaw going at the quarterback with how athletic and how talented and how intelligent he is going to be fun to watch. I'm excited to see what that's going to look like. Obviously, like Patrick mentioned, you're going to see a lot more nickel, a lot more cover 3. They lost one of their starting linebackers, so I do think that's a good thing. I think that's probably why they didn't prioritize Azeez Al-Shaair a little bit more in the offseason, because they knew he wasn't going to be as big of a part of the defense if he did stick around. So again, I'm very excited to see what this defense is going to look like this year because it's still going to be a fuck you defense, just in a different way.
Want to hear my favorite thing about Steve Wilks being the new defensive coordinator on the 49ers?
Go for it.
Against a blitz heavy team, if you're an offense, of course, you know me, I'm looking a lot at the line of scrimmage here. When a team is blitzing more, it becomes a lot harder to double team. And they have Javon Hargrave and Nick Bosa.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem very fair.
Well, speaking of that, as Brian pointed out, we've been talking about, this isn't a team that blitzed a lot last year. And Brian said he didn't have the numbers. I do have the numbers. So they were very, very reliant on their front four last year. In fact, on third and short, they were 20th in blitz percentage with 27.8% of their snaps. On third and medium, they were 16th with 32.8% of their snaps. And then third and long, they were 13th with 38.2% of their snaps. So really, they were only above league average on third and long. And the only time you really saw them blitz last year was when they wanted to do exactly what Patrick just said, and that's force a one-on-one for Nick Bosa. Because there are very few players in this league, if any, that can take on Nick Bosa one-on-one and win. And out of those very few players, one of them just so happens to play on the same team as him. So that makes it very not fair for literally everybody else. And then you add Javon Hargrave into that mix, which we'll get into. Good luck, right? That's all I can tell you. Good luck. What the Niners do a lot, though, or at least did last year, is stunts. They were 5th in third down stunt percentage with 54.2% of their snaps. This is all between the 20s, by the way. When you get in the red zone, it's a little bit different, but the majority of the field, 54.2% of snaps on third down were used for stunts. They stunted. And that's because they have so many good defensive linemen that, are really smart and know how to, leverage guys and get moving and slip through cracks and things like that. That's the big thing with this defense is you look at it and maybe they don't have a ton of star power. They definitely have their star power. Don't get me wrong. But especially when you looked at their secondary last year, there wasn't anybody outside of Charvarius Ward that you're like, oh my God, this guy's great. Talanoa Hufanga, maybe by the end of the year, people are starting to catch on to. But outside of that, Tashawn Gibson was a starter. Jimmy Ward. I can't even think of who else they had at corner. That's telling you, how almost not forgettable, but not superstar power these guys were. But the defense is executed so well because everybody on it is smart. They bought into D'Amico's plan, and D'Amico always had them on the same page.
And they also had the best linebacker core, not just of this year, probably of the past 3 years in the NFL. I might be wrong.
Sure.
I'm kind of pulling that out of my ass, but it was a stacked linebacker core without a doubt. And that having a stacked unit on your defense is always very good at making up for weaknesses in other spots. Not many of the best defenses in the league are necessarily well-rounded, although that is an approach you could have. It's more of, here's what we do well, and we do it really, really well.
For sure.
And for the 49ers, that was their linebacker core. And then Nick Bosa just existing, and Talanoa Hufanga was, I think, incredible. I feel like
heat-seeking missile out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, you gave that guy a summer to work with Troy Polamalu, who did exactly what the Niners want him to do. We should have seen it coming from a mile away that he was going to be awesome last year. I love Hufanga. He is one of my favorite players in the league. He became it very, very quickly last year. And then obviously Fred Warner, another one of my favorite players in the league. Linebackers on defense are my fullbacks, right? Fucking love linebackers. It's starting to become a lost art. And the San Francisco 49ers, another reason why I love that team so much, is they appreciate it. And not only do they appreciate it, they goddamn perfected it, right? Fred Warner is, in my opinion, by far and away the best linebacker in football. He is to linebackers what Pat Mahomes is to quarterbacks. He is in his own tier. Nobody is near him. I don't care what anybody says. You can praise whoever. Demario Davis, Roquan Smith. Those guys are great. They're not Fred Warner. There's no comparison.
There's too many linebackers where you watch them and you're like, damn, this guy's really good against the run. He can't really cover that well. Or, oh my God, this guy's really good in coverage, but he can't really make plays on the line of scrimmage or shed blocks that well.
And Fred Warner can make inhuman plays in both aspects of the game.
Exactly.
I'm sorry to steal your thunder there, but I had to throw in inhuman because what he does is absolutely inhuman.
Yeah.
It's
That's
Fred
the
Warner's.
reason. That's the reason they could run base so much last year because
Mhm.
Fred Warner might as well be a D-back.
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, it's very similar to those Bears teams. Fred Warner is like a smaller Brian Urlacher. They are very similar players. And that, as a Bears fan, is like the highest praise I can give to a goddamn linebacker. I love Fred Warner. He's amazing. But jumping into coverages, talking about what types of coverages they ran last year, they were 26th in cover 0 with 0.06% of their snaps. Tied for 25th in cover 1 with 15.1% of their snaps. Tied for 12th in cover 2 with 15.8% of their snaps. And that number actually jumped up to 3rd in the second half of games because when they got up big, they just said, fuck it, we're going to sit in cover 2 and let what we were just talking about dare you to try to do anything about it. And nobody ever could. They were tied for 8th in cover 3 with 41.2% of snaps. And I've talked about this a lot on this series in particular. Cover 3 is used nowadays a lot to defend the run. And DeMeco Ryans, if there is one thing he will not let happen, it's let another team run on him. So he is going to be, as aggressive against the run as he possibly can be. And they, like I said, they were tied for 8th this year. I think that number is going to jump up even higher under Steve Wilks. They were tied for 11th in quarters with 16.5%. This was something they used as a counter to trips, pretty situational for them. They were tied for 18th in quarter half with 17.1% of their snaps. And then they were 28th in cover 5 with 0.2% of their snaps. So again, very much a basic offense. The high numbers were the high percentages were very much, basic stuff and then kind of some counters here and there in specific situations. That'll change next year. Like I said, it's going to be more cover 3, probably a little bit more quarters. I like Steve Wilks a lot. I think he's a great replacement for DeMeco. I think you guys did a fantastic job finding somebody to take over for him. So I'm excited to see what the defense is going to look like next year for San Fran for sure.
A little bit of a learning curve, but I still think it's going to be really good after the first maybe 4 weeks it'll take to adjust.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, that group's super talented and they're all super smart. So I have no qualms about expecting them to pick it up pretty quickly and be able to run with it. But
Brian, are you expecting better or worse?
That's a really tough question. I like what you said. I forgot if it was David or Patrick who mentioned the secondary. And I take back what I said earlier about having no questions really about this defense. I feel like our secondary has been a weak point over the past few years. And if you were a Niners fan and you've been watching the games, I can't tell you how many times PIs have screwed us over, defensive holdings in the secondary. They're just so frustrating to watch, and that's happened so many times. And I don't know if we have a clear-cut, definitive starter in the nickel position. We think that Diamador Lenore, he's going to be starting opposite to Charvarius Ward, but the nickel, it's looking like Isaiah Oliver, but there's also younger guys like Sam Womack or Ambry Thomas who had flashes of greatness over the past few seasons, but it's really up in the air. So I'd like to see that ironed out going into the regular season, because if there's one position that sort of, or one overall area on the defense that sort of concerns me, it would be our secondary.
That's definitely fair. And I'm glad you asked that, Patrick, actually, because the nickel corner for the Niners is definitely something that I overlooked, but I'm looking at their depth chart right now and obviously hearing the names Brian listed off, definitely a concern. And like I said, if you're going to be sitting in more cover 3, you're going to be sitting in more nickel, you're going to have a more base 4-2-5 defense. You might want to get that ironed out. You might want to get that figured out. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. I'm really excited for this defense. I think there's a lot of fun pieces here. Get a great guy running it. There's historic greatness there, so I'm not too worried about it, but the nickel position is definitely something.
The pressure should help them be able to make up for
sure.
that.
Yeah.
But it is definitely a weak spot if teams could somehow block both Hargrave, Bosa, and a blitzing linebacker, whether that's Greenlaw or Warner.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I mean, hey, you guys signed Jack Coletto, who played literally every position it felt like in college. So fuck it, throw him back there. see what happens, you know. And we'll talk more about him when we get to the draft. I'm currently editing this video, and I realized we didn't actually talk about Coletto any, which I apologize for. I love Jack Coletto. Just know that he's somebody that's going to fit in with Shanahan very well, probably be a core special teamer. Played fullback, linebacker, and quarterback in college, so he's a guy I really like. And I'm sure Shanahan will find a way to get him on offense here sooner rather than later at some point. Jumping over to the offense and kind of talking about some of the schematics there. I talk about it all the time. The most beautiful thing in football right now is the zone run game, specifically the type that Kyle Shanahan employs and has spread throughout the league. It feels like half the league now runs the Shanahan run game. Looking at the splits real quick, and then I'm going to hand off duties to Patrick so he can use his notes because I don't want them to go to waste. But looking at the splits, like I said, they were tied for 5th in outside zone usage with 36% of their run plays. Tied for 24th in inside zone with 17% of their run plays. Tied for 29th in duo with 8%. Tied for 9th in power with 10%, which is kind of surprising because that's not typically a Shanahan thing. But with how athletic their guards have been and, you know, their ability to get out in space, it makes sense. I'm not shocked. Well, let me put it this way. It's surprising, but it makes sense. That's what I'm trying to say there. Tied for 7th in counter with 10% makes perfect sense. Counters a perfect, for lack of better words, counter punch to outside zone because teams, when they're fitting against zone running plays, they leave, they make it easier for counter to be ran by an offense. They're tied for 15th in draw with 2% of their plays, and then tied for 20th in pin and pull with 4% of their plays. So nothing too crazy, very Shanahanian, you know, the norm that we're used to from the greatest run specialist in football. Patrick, I can literally see you fiending over there, so go ahead, take the floor.
Okay, so let me just say this. If you are interested in Kyle Shanahan, I hope you're fine with me plugging something that isn't even my content, but The Athletic, I don't know if you listen to this, David, but you'll definitely like it. The Athletic made a podcast over the summer called The Play Callers, and it is literally the history of not just Shanahan, but also his disciples. And they have Mike LaFleur on it. They have Mike McDaniel on it. They have all these guys, Robert Saleh, even they take a little bit of focus on the defensive side of the ball. It's literally all the way, it starts all the way back in his days. And they just go year by year and talk about McVay and them winning the Super Bowl and all that great stuff. And they go really deep into the X's and O's of the offense. So it's a really great listen. It's a 5-episode thing. Each episode is like an hour long. It's really, really good. I highly recommend it to everyone who wants to know more about the great Kyle Shanahan. But as for my observations from Kyle Shanahan, and I'm also going to go a little bit back in the history, and I'm going to be staring down at my notes here because I don't want to miss anything because I have a lot.
For sure.
You have to understand, back in Shanahan's Washington and Atlanta days, just running outside zone as like the main run play was enough of a changeup pitch compared to opposing offenses that defenses were completely mind-fucked by just how much outside zone Kyle Shanahan was calling and how they based an entire offense around it. But eventually the development of stuff like the wide 9 really started to screw that up for Shanahan. But like all great coaches, he adapted when he came to San Fran. He was using more counter and power, like you mentioned, especially this year. Now he's calling it so much, it's more than just a wrinkle in the offense. He's also calling some toss plays that you normally only see in high school football. Like, that's how creative they are, and they're working, like, really, really well. He's also making wide receivers an extension of the run game. They were number 1 in yards after catch this year, and it was by, like, a wide margin. It was, like, 56% of their yardage in terms of passing yards was from yards after catch. And it's not just setting them up in good after catch situations. It's not just having the right players in terms of talent. It's also using them in the backfield and just handing it off to them. It's also just jet sweeps to them, all that good stuff. Misdirection is all over the offense. That's one of the most abundantly clear things when you're watching 49ers film. And they have just added so many other complex wrinkles to humble any defensive coordinator that is going against a Shanahanian offense. The utilization of motion is another thing that is very, very clear, and it just makes it so much easier to misdirect the opposing offense. And you'll hear me say that a lot because that's the key goal of the Shanahan offense, to make linebackers, no matter how smart they are, to make defensive coordinators, no matter how smart they are, be like, where the fuck's the ball going? Everything looks exactly the same. Who has the ball? And we just a little bit of hesitation when McCaffrey or Deebo Samuel is the guy getting the ball kills you, especially at an NFL level. One of the main ways he does this is by making plays look exactly the same. Like I said, one play, you'll see Deebo Samuel do a cross formation motion, and halfway through it, Brock Purdy or Trey Lance is going to get the ball, and they're going to fake a handoff to Deebo Samuel and then hand it off to Elijah Mitchell. But then 4 plays later, they're going to do that same exact look. It looks exactly the same. And then once Purdy gets the ball, or whoever the quarterback is, gets the ball, instead of faking to Deebo, they're going to actually hand it off to him, and then they'll fake the handoff to Elijah Mitchell. And all these quarterbacks have such good sleight of hand, and they're great with the play action. It's really, really scary for opposing defenses. The play calling builds upon the unpredictability and misdirection of the offense. And I also love his usage of personnel. Let's say that George Kittle and Trent Williams are both on the same side of the formation. What do you assume is going to happen? You think they're going to run behind them? Nope. Trent Williams is going to be only responsible for sealing off the backside. George Kittle is going to go across the formation to block the play side linebacker. And look at that, Christian McCaffrey went for a 20-yard gain.
And then he has Trent Williams do the exact same thing that Kittle just did on a reverse play, and somebody shits their pants as they get laid the fuck out by Trent Williams sprinting at full speed across the offensive line. Sorry, I had to put that in there.
Average Trent Williams.
Trent Williams pulling is one of the most beautiful things in football. In fact, I would argue outside of literally anything that involves a fullback, it is the most beautiful thing the sport has to offer. Anyways, continue. You're doing very good.
I was just about to say pretty much that same thing. And one of the main concerns that I have, and we'll get to this later, is I don't know how well the backside runs or the runs away from Trent Williams are going to work now that they don't have McGlinchey. Because I know McGlinchey kind of gets hate for not being this great pass protector.
One hell of a run blocker.
Exactly. So there's a lot of concern there. But then again, who needs great run blockers when you just have the best run blocking scheme in the NFL?
Who needs a good right tackle when you can simply lead block with the greatest fullback in the league in the past 15 years?
Yeah, that's.
I had to be the first one to mention him. I'm sorry.
Was it right before that 15-year mark? Was that Lorenzo Neal? Is that like
I don't know. 15 years was an estimation. I don't know.
But you do mean Lorenzo Neal, right?
Lorenzo, there were a couple guys in that conversation. That's a whole other conversation. But Kyle Juszczyk's the best one that has been in the league in my formative football years. We'll put it that way. And the time that I've been watching football seriously and actually knew what was going on, it's Kyle Juszczyk, and then it's everybody else. And it's not particularly close.
Yeah, and it's just so many coaches. If they had Juszczyk, who, like you said, phenomenal lead blocker, and George Kittle, who is the best blocking tight end in the NFL, and then Trent Williams, would just be like, line them up all on the same side of the formation, and we'll run behind them every play. But Shanahan is just so ballsy, and he's so confident in just his play design. He's like, yeah, I have these guys, but what if I put them all on the same side of the formation? Now you look like an idiot lining up all your best players on that side and overloading that side, and then I'm going to run to the backside. You're very weak in that area, and hey, look how well that worked.
And then the beauty of that is he ends up relying on some wide receiver that's split out wide who somehow sets a beautiful fucking block and springs a long-ass run because, as you mentioned, the wide receivers are obviously a big part of the run game as runners. But the way Shanahan uses his receivers as blockers, too, is also beautiful. That's why I love Shanahan so much. If you play for him, I don't care what position you're playing. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Block Purdy throwing out chip blocks next year. You need to know how to block for the damn running back or whoever has the ball. And that's old school football in 2023 made modern, and I love it. Sorry,
He's
continue.
a
I'm
big
just
guy.
excited.
Yeah, he's a big guy for the positionless player movement.
Exactly.
And that is a very legit thing. No matter how much you boomers want to deny it, it is a very real thing that Kyle Juszczyk can line up out wide. Deebo Samuel can line up at tight end. They could do all this stuff. They want to do all this stuff. They choose to do all this stuff, and it works. Being able to line up whatever player wherever and use them however just opens up so many opportunities.
Juszczyk 50-yard touchdown pass to Debo coming soon. Book it.
Overall, just to end this, before I go on an even longer rant, the play design is extremely creative. His play calling is near perfection. And his utilization of personnel is spectacular. Add this all to a guy who has the balls to be completely unconstrained, and you have the best offensive mind in the sport.
Couldn't agree more. And he does all that despite not having, a superstar quarterback that everyone thinks you need right now to win games and be an elite offense.
Who needs that when you have Kyle Juszczyk?
Exactly. Unironically, I think Kyle Juszczyk is more important to this offense than any of their quarterbacks. And I say that, I swear to God, that's not a narrative thing. That's not me fucking with you. I promise you, I wholeheartedly believe that Kyle Juszczyk is more important to the San Francisco 49ers offense than Brock Purdy, than Trey Lance, than Sam Darnold, than Jimmy G, than whoever you line up at quarterback.
I'm not going to give you any disagreement there. I feel like
'Cause
that
this
shouldn't even be a hot take.
I'm going to build off of it. And then, Brian, I want to hear your thoughts because you're just sitting over there taking it all in. But
this is wonderful. I'm having an out-of-body experience right now.
I'm very glad you're enjoying it. But the beauty of this offense, and Patrick so beautifully illustrated the roles of everybody else, right? The offensive, or the tackles specifically, the tight ends, the receivers, the running backs. But Kyle Juszczyk's role in this offense is truly what gives me hope for the fullback position. Because Kyle Juszczyk, as you mentioned, is the positionless fullback, right? He can play tight end. He can play fullback. He can play out wide at wide receiver. He can play in the slot. You can line him up at halfback and actually run the ball with him and get legitimate yards because he's pretty quick. He's just the ultimate. People want to talk about Taysom Hill. Who cares? Kyle Juszczyk is the real ultimate Swiss Army knife in the NFL. Okay. Patrick did a wonderful job again talking about the mismatches and the personnel usage and the way you keep the defense on your toes. Ironically, there was a press conference done by not Kyle Shanahan, but Mike McDaniel, talking about the importance of the fullback to his offense. And obviously his offense is just an adaptation of Shanahan's offense. He comes from that tree. They worked together for a long time. That's where he learned, right? You take a fullback in a league where a lot of teams aren't necessarily used to them doing a lot. Like, it's no secret that the fullback position isn't what it used to be back in the day. You'd have one on the field every play. Nowadays, most teams, probably less than 15%. Shanahan, I don't know the exact number, but Juszczyk and Pat Ricard are always 1A and 1B when it comes to usage in football. And now Ricard is apparently playing guard, which keeps me up at night. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. You keep this fullback on the field for an extended period of time. And when you have a guy like Juszczyk who can do anything, you don't know what he's doing on a given play. He could be pulling across the line and creating a misdirection for the running back. He could be lead blocking for the running back. He could be linking out and running a flat route. He could leak out and run a wheel route and fucking get a toe tap catch on the sideline, which he did last year against the Denver Broncos. He could shift into the slot and then go out, run a zig route and beat your nickel corner. He can shift into tight end and run a slant and beat your linebacker. He can do all these different things just from starting out lined up at the fullback position. And because of that, defenses have to respect it. So they come in and they bring these heavier boxes with extra linebackers, and then you motion Juszczyk out. All of a sudden, you've got this spread-ish formation, right? No longer is it a normal I form or a 21 personnel. All of a sudden, it's 11 personnel, and you've got 3 receivers out there, and Juszczyk's one of them. And you can run, things that you would run with your normal 3 wide receiver sets because Juszczyk can effectively play that role for you as your third receiver out there. And all of a sudden, you have a linebacker confused. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Or, when you run a bootleg and Juszczyk's running out into the flat a couple times, like you said, they run a lot of plays out of the same base formations. You get 3 plays where Juszczyk's running into the flat, then the linebacker slips to the flat. Juszczyk all of a sudden turns upfield. He's upfield 15 yards before the linebacker can figure out what the hell just happened. He's torching him for a touchdown, right? I'm not acting like Kyle Juszczyk's a burner, but with how he has quick feet and with how smart he is, he can leak upfield like that. It's beautiful, all the different things that can be done in a modern NFL offense with a fullback like Kyle Juszczyk. And the fullback position is very similar to the running back position, where it's not the same as it used to be. You don't want these big hulking behemoths at fullback. Like, there's exceptions to that. You have your Pat Ricards, you have your Jakob Johnsons. Those guys are great, right? There's always going to be exceptions to the rule. But you look at some of the top fullbacks in the league right now, CJ Ham, Alec Ingold, Kari Blasingame. They're all guys that are a lot closer to Juszczyk, a lot closer to this versatile player than the traditional fullback. And that's why Kyle Juszczyk is like the fullback messiah. He's the one that's showing everybody the way of how fullbacks need to be used, what they need to become, and what's in store for them in the future. There have been 2 fullbacks that have come out of the draft in the last 2 years, Clint Ratkovich and Hunter Lipke, 2 guys that I have talked about extensively. Now, Ratkovich, his position right now is a little iffy because he's backing up a really good blocking fullback on a team that just wants their fullback to block, and he tore his ACL the year he was meant to enter the NFL draft. So that's a little tough for him. Hunter Lipke just got picked up by the Dallas Cowboys. They haven't used a fullback in forever. They went out of their way to get him, meaning they want to use him. So I think we're going to start to see more players that essentially coming out of college are short tight ends or played fullback at a smaller school come into the league and play more like Juszczyk, because Ratkovich and Lipke both remind me a lot of Kyle Juszczyk. And I know 50 people probably just clicked off this video because I just went on a 5-minute fullback rant. But the point here is Shanahan's usage of Kyle Juszczyk is beautiful. Kyle Juszczyk is incredibly important to this offense. And I feel like a lot of people outside of San Francisco don't appreciate that. So I had to bring it up. But Bryan, obviously, we've kind of had you listening here. What are your thoughts as a fan on Kyle Shanahan's run game? And you don't have to get as in depth and nerd out like we did, but just what are your thoughts on it?
If you want to nerd out, feel free.
By all means. But
listen,
it's up to you.
I'm totally out footballed by you two today. I just got to be completely honest with you. So this is coming from a fan perspective. I mean, I'm not as much of a fullback meat rider as you both are, maybe. I mean, I love Kyle Juszczyk. All right, he's the OG Kyle Shanahan. He was part of the first free agent class that he brought in. So he's been with us since the Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch regime. But I don't know where to start, man. I love Kyle Juszczyk. I love what he brings to this offense. I think you both nailed all your points excellently. Just going back to that toe tap grab, sideline grab against Denver. I mean, that was just beautiful. You could shed a tear.
I did.
Right? It was just like a fullback doing what's it's incredible. Mm-hmm. And if you want to go back to Kyle Shanahan's run scheme, I mean, it's just from a fan perspective, it's really exciting to watch. And Niner games are fun to watch for that reason. You don't have to be a Niner fan to just tune in and watch a Niners game and just, enjoy pure football. This is good football right here. And you're seeing all these play designs. And like Patrick mentioned, you can have one specific play where a receiver's going in motion. It's a play action or some sort that it's fake handoff to the receiver, hand it off to the running back. And a few plays later, same sort of play, except they actually hand it off to who knows what. I mean, there's just so much variation, and it's like a plug and play offense. They're just having fun out there, and it's fun to watch as a fan. And I know you guys dove into the specifics, statistics, and all of that, and I love to hear that. But just from a fan perspective, it's really fun to watch. And you don't have to be a Niners fan to appreciate the complexity, and not even just the complexity, but just sort of how it's a duality of a simple but also a complex offense in the way that Kyle Shanahan makes it. And we're very lucky to be witnessing this, and it's really a beautiful thing.
Also, I don't know why these people would be listening, but just for the record, if you're a Rams fan, thank Kyle Shanahan. If you're a Packers fan, thank Kyle Shanahan. If you're a Dolphins fan, thank Kyle Shanahan. Am I missing?
If you're a Bears fan, thank Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah. If you're a fan of any team other than like, I don't know, the Chiefs,
the Chiefs.
Baltimore, thank Kyle Shanahan. There's a couple. Even defensively.
We don't talk about those teams.
Even defensively, DeMeco Ryans, thank Kyle Shanahan.
The Jets as a whole, both offense and defense, because what they do is very similar to the 49ers.
Very similar, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He is the grandfather of the new NFL offenses that aren't boring spread. Oh, let's line up in the shotgun formation every play and not have a fullback.
5 wide receivers, 21 personnel, yes. Every team should run 21 personnel. It is God's gift to this planet. But Brian, you said you felt out footballed by us. I think you illustrated what Shanahan's offense is perfectly. It truly is simple yet complex and fun, and it's almost poetic, really.
It is. It really is. And, like I said, you don't have to be a Niners fan to appreciate it. And I'm glad you two do. But just speaking collectively as a whole, I mean, just watching Niners games back in like 2017, 2018, we had Nick Mullins, Brian Hoyer, CJ Beathard. Even then, even though we didn't have the success as we did now, it was still genuinely fun to watch those games. I remember, I think it was week 3. It was a Thursday night game against the Rams. It was ridiculously high scoring, and Brian Hoyer was our quarterback. And there were just a lot of crazy plays going on that game. And it was like a breath of fresh air after having to deal with, Chip Kelly, Jim Tomsula, and all the way back to, those were some horrific years. But I'm really appreciative of Kyle Shanahan and what he has done for our team. But for anyone else watching this, you don't have to be a 49er fan or whatnot. Like you guys said, he's changed the NFL in the way of sort of paving the road for this modern NFL offense. And it's really fun to watch. And you can't be more grateful in that.
Just the combination of the X's and O's and the Jimmys and Joes is phenomenal. It's a great display of that.
Yeah,
totally.
I mean, listen, you put it perfectly. It's a breath of fresh air, right? I can tell you right now, as a Bears fan, I have seen some pretty horrendous fucking offenses in my lifetime, right? I sat through 4 years of Matt Nagy. I dealt with, the fucker from the XFL that I can't, or the CFL that I can't remember.
Was Mike Glennon in the CFL?
No, the coach. Fuck.
Oh.
The Bears hired him thinking it was this big brain move, and it was horrible. Oh my God, I got to look this up. But anyways, my point here is I'm not lying when I say there would be years where Mark Trestman, that was his name. Fuck Mark Trestman. Anyways, there have genuinely been times where I have gotten done watching a Bears game and just been broken inside and then turned on a 49ers game. And it, like you said, it was a breath of fresh air. It was almost like rinsing my mouth out after a horrible, horrible meal with the most perfect chocolate cake God has ever created. It was truly, truly wonderful. I love it. And I'm so glad that, it's becoming kind of widespread and everyone's putting their own little spins on it. That's why I like Miami so much. And I like Mike McDaniel because he is, in my eyes, the perfect Kyle Shanahan disciple. And, that's why I'm so glad the Bears have Luke Getsy, because he's not, I don't know if he's a direct Shanahan guy. I don't know if he ever worked with Shanahan directly, but he's from that tree and he runs a lot of the same concepts and things like that.
He's from LaFleur.
Right.
He connects through LaFleur.
Yeah.
That's the thing. There's so many branches off of this tree now. Everyone somehow connects, it feels like.
And that's why the fullback's coming back, baby. They say I'm crazy. I'm not crazy.
It was a big loss. It was a big loss that Ricard went to Monken, one of the few non-Shanahan coaches, but
hey, I refuse to believe it until I see it, okay? Maybe this is all a misdirect. Everyone's preparing for Baltimore. They're like, oh, we don't have to worry about a fullback anymore. Week 1, come out in fucking 32 personnel with Ricard and Ben Mason at fullback. It's over.
Mason's on the Broncos now, but yeah.
Ben Mason's
Oh, that's
on the
Powers. That's
Broncos?
Powers. That's Ben Powers. My bad.
Ben Mason, the fullback from Michigan that's on their practice squad all year, every year, that for
Yeah.
some reason Ravens fans think should replace Ricard because he's skinnier and therefore more athletic and better. Ravens fans are dumb. We don't talk about them. Anyways,
I was thinking
moving
of
on.
Ben Powers. My apologies.
Yeah. Don't
He
you ever
should line up at
disrespect...
full. He should line up at fullback though. That'd be sick.
No, because they have Michael Burton now in Denver. And oh my God, I'm fucking blanking on names today. Sean Payton, who I literally was just talking about last night in the Broncos preview I just recorded. Sean Payton actually likes fullbacks and really likes Michael Burton. Michael Burton got his career high in usage under Sean Payton in New Orleans. So they'll actually use a fullback. But anyways, jumping over to the passing game, which is equally as exciting, and Patrick and I did allude to a little bit, as you know, the Niners really like to build off of the run game into the passing game. This is a team that was 25th in play action percentage, with 22% of their passing plays coming out of play action, which is
Surprising.
unheard of for Shanahan.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, primarily because of Jimmy G, right? Jimmy G is somebody that works really well out of play action, and Shanahan likes to make his quarterbacks' jobs a hell of a lot easier. And when Jimmy G left, it shifted, and the number dropped a lot.
It's really scary for the defense to move with the quarterback's back facing it. So it makes sense why, even though a lot of people think about it like, oh, play action really helps the quarterback, and it does, but it also causes changes that you don't see happen because your back has to turn.
It depends on the quarterback.
Yeah, and I just
like a young quarterback,
it was a preference thing.
Yeah, like a young quarterback like Brock Purdy, who, you know, went in the 7th round, and you're not super sure about his processor. Probably better to stay away from play action. Jimmy G, who's been in the league for a while and despite his faults knows how to read a defense. Sure.
Debatable.
Right. He knows how to read a defense better than Brock Purdy does. Okay.
You don't want me to start with the Garoppolo hate. Okay. He's not on the team. It's not relevant. But yeah, I am fair. The number one.
I'm not a big Jimmy G guy either. I'm just saying he is at least an intelligent quarterback. He might not
intelligent enough to walk out of the back of the end zone and throw a pick on the same play. Yeah.
Well, hey, listen. Apparently, one of the best NFL analysts out there also walked out of the back of the end zone. So apparently, that's a good thing. Fucking Dan Orlovsky. I hate that guy. That's a whole other conversation. But anyways, continuing on talking about the 49ers offense. They were 6th in average time to throw, meaning they got the ball out the 6th quickest. No surprise there. Very much Shanahan. Like Patrick said, they view a lot of their quick passing game as an extension of the run game. So they want to get their ball to the receivers quick so they can cook after the catch. 32nd in air yard percentage with 45%. Again, they love letting their receivers cook after the catch. By the way, air yard percentage, for those who aren't aware, is just the amount of their passing yards that came through the air rather than after the catch. Pretty self-explanatory, but I figured I'd throw that out. So if you're 32nd in air yard percentage, you're going to be first in the league in yards after catch percentage. No surprises there. One thing I want to give credit to Purdy to that I didn't do earlier, just because I have it written down in my notes here. He was really good last year at setting guys up in situations where they could succeed after the catch. Like that was something that, you know, despite whatever issues I had with him last year, he was really good at that. They were tied for 27th in average depth of target with 7.8 yards per target. So Purdy, while not quite airing it out, was stretching the field a lot more than Jimmy G usually did. They were tied for 20th in big time throw percentage with 3.4%. Again, not airing the ball out at 10, so that makes sense. And they were 3rd in yards per attempt with 8.3 yards, a lot of that coming after the catch. So no numbers there outside of the play action number is really that surprising. Very stereotypical of a Shanahan offense. And the play action number is simple because they had a different quarterback. So before we jump over to the offseason, I don't know if there's anything either of you want to add about the passing game there. I feel like it's a lot less in depth and a lot less complex than the running game. But Patrick, I'm sure you're going to completely disagree with me and go on a rant for the next 10 minutes because you're you.
I just wanted to say one more statistic.
Okay.
Just because O-line, in case you were curious how good they were in terms of pass blocking, they were ranked 10th. They allowed the 10th lowest percentage of pressures on dropbacks, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I just wanted
It's a
to
good
put
O-line.
that out there.
Yeah. It's another big
Even
thing for
with
Shanahan.
McGlinchey not being the best pass blocker, they were still a good pass blocking a lot.
Yeah. And speaking of McGlinchey, jumping over to free agency, specifically talking about the guys who left the 49ers first, getting the pain out of the way, and then we'll jump into some of the more fun stuff. Bryan, this question's more geared towards you, but Patrick, obviously you're free to answer as well. What loss in free agency hurt you the most? Or, whether it's a player that you really liked and you're sad to see go, someone you think is going to have a big impact on the team not being there, anything like that. Just who do you think hurt the worst?
That's a good question. A player that hurt personally is Jimmy Ward. He was the longest tenured 49er currently on the roster at that
Oh,
point in
really?
time.
I didn't know
He
that.
was part of the 2014 draft class. And I remember getting a signed rookie card of his that I still have. So I followed his
cool.
career for a while. His early years in his career, unfortunately, he was mixed around different positions on the defense a lot, but he wanted to stay at safety and he got his shot. I feel like that's where he really excelled. And losing his veteran presence is definitely tough for a team overall. He's been through everything with the Niners, it seems like, through thick and thin. And now he's joined D'Amico Ryans over in Houston, and I wish him all the best. So I feel like personally, I was really, really sad to see him go, but I totally understand. Just having now Talanoa Hufanga and Tashawn Gibson up there, I feel confident, but it definitely hurts me personally seeing someone that I followed for so long have to depart.
For sure.
I would go Mike McGlinchey just because I'm worried they might not abandon. Shanahan doesn't abandon, but kind of do less of the runs away from Trent Williams, which is a good and a bad thing, but I like that they have the ability to run away from him and still have a very good tackle on the play side. It's just good to have those options, and they won't have those options anymore, or unless someone really breaks out. I don't really think anyone will, but
Yeah, I
Mike
don't know
McGlinchey,
how
I think,
confident I am personally in Colton McKivitz or Matt Pryor.
Yeah.
But we'll have to see. I have more faith in Shanahan, especially when it comes to that kind of stuff, than literally anybody.
Yeah,
So
but
they'll
it's just
figure it out.
It's just an option. He wasn't a key
For
player.
sure.
He wasn't a key player necessarily, but he was an important one.
Sure.
And it's just the option of some of the stuff they used to do last year. They're not going to be able to do as much.
Mm-hmm, for sure. A player I feel like is going to hurt a little bit is Charles Omenihu, the edge rusher. Because like Bryan mentioned earlier on, you kind of don't know who's playing opposite of Nick Bosa right now. There's a couple guys in contention, and they could absolutely step up and be good. I'm not saying they won't. It's just Charles Omenihu was someone who was really consistent. And while he wasn't like a full-time starter, he played 53% of snaps last year. He was definitely an impactful player on the defensive line. So I'm sure someone like Drake Jackson can step up to the occasion and take over. I'm not saying they can't, but losing a guy like that who's just really consistent and you could rely on definitely sucks. Another guy that was pretty consistent and you can rely on, despite being a fossil at this point, is my boy Robbie Gould, who unfortunately got let go by or not let go, but just didn't get re-signed by the 49ers. Someone that Bears fans are clamoring for, they want him back, and I'd welcome him with open arms. But he's a 40-year-old kicker somewhere in there. You guys drafted one, and we'll talk about him when we get to the draft, but it's not the end of the world. I just hate seeing that he's not employed right now. Some other notable names, Samson Ebukam, who played 52% of snaps off the edge last year. Jimmy G's gone. Jimmy Ward, who Bryan already mentioned. Daniel Brunskill, who was a really good swing guard, kind of really good backup interior offensive lineman. Azeez Al-Shaair, who we talked about earlier, was that third linebacker. I think he's going to be pretty good in Tennessee, I think is where he signed. If I'm not mistaken, it was either Tennessee or the Raiders. Okay, cool. I think he's going to be good as a starter there. I like Shaair a good bit. And then some lesser names, Jordan Matthews, the wide receiver, Jason Verrett, the cornerback, who I feel bad for. That guy just can't catch a fucking break. The cornerback, Dante Johnson. Interior defensive lineman, Maurice Hurst. Tight end, Tyler Croft. Cornerback, Emmanuel Mosley. Safety, Tarvarius Moore, Madden legend. Edge rusher, Jordan Willis. Quarterback, Josh Johnson. And then interior defensive lineman, Hassan Ridgeway are all the guys who are no longer 49ers.
I'll bet you $50 Dante Johnson's going to somehow end up on the Niners active roster sometime later in the season. He always finds a way. That's like a running thing with Niners fans over the past few seasons. Now he always finds a way.
He's going to see this video, and that's going to be motivation for him to jump back on the roster. You just spoke it into existence.
It's also notable they maintained 19 of their 22 starters.
Yeah.
They lost Jimmy Ward, Mike McGlinchey, and Azeez Al-Shaair. Everyone else, in terms of starters, they kept. Whether or not they're going to keep their starting spot, Javon Kinlaw, it doesn't seem like he's going to be a starter, but I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Armstead moves back to edge. He's the complimentary guy to Bosa.
That could work, actually.
Yeah, I mean, he's done it before. They move him around all the time, really. I think it's going to be a unique rotation there. Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. Speaking of him, just kind of off topic real quick. Brian, I'm sure you're aware of the whole Javon Kinlaw, Grant Cohn thing, right?
Yes, they had a lot of beef.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that as a Niners fan? I've always been curious, but I've never had the chance to ask one.
So that whole drama, I don't know how long it's been going on, but Grant Cohn, he starts shit with everyone.
He's an asshole. Yeah.
My favorite Niners beat reporter is David Lombardi. I think he's a really nice guy, really genuine guy. But besides that, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think Grant's kind of a clown, and he's more of a nuisance whenever he's attending whatever press conference or OTAs or whatnot. But I don't want to go too much into that. But
fair.
Yeah, but from my general understanding of the situation, I feel like he's more of a nuisance.
Yeah. He's his dad was a Niners beat writer, if I'm not mistaken, and that was kind of how he got the job. I think I remember reading something like that, and if that's the case, that man is a definition of a fucking nepotism baby. Like he is such an asswipe, dude. I can't stand him.
He starts shit when there doesn't need to be, and it's kind of annoying.
Yeah. It's tough. It's definitely tough. Like, I know you said you don't want to get into it, but it's my show and I don't care about talking shit.
Go for it. I want to hear your opinion on this because I'm surprised his shit has like gone throughout the whole NFL, because I felt like that was more of a local issue. But I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so to be a grown man, right, and act the way he does is really embarrassing. Like, when Javon, what was it? Was it Javon Kinlaw like chest bumped him, like kind of puffed up to him, and he was like, "Oh, I wanted him to hit me because I wanted to sue him and be rich and
something
retire."
Like that, yeah.
Like, that's such an asshole move, dude. Like, I know you're trying to look like a tough guy. That gives you the exact opposite impression. You look like a bitch saying something like that. Like, it's saying anything in that situation. Even if he would have said, "I wish you would have hit me so I could hit him back," he would have looked like even more of a bitch. Like, there's nothing you can say in that situation and not look like a bitch. So the fact that he opened his mouth and was running his mouth blows my mind.
I love how
Kinlaw could snap him in half, dude.
I love how you didn't insult him like as a reporter. You said as a man.
Yeah.
Just something about the chance of the choice of words I found funny.
Yeah,
there.
no, as a man, Grant Cohn's a bitch. Point blank, period. I honestly am not too familiar with his work as a beat writer. I literally only know of him because there is one thing I remember where he tried to point fingers at Trent Williams and be like, "This is a really bad block on this play, blah, blah, blah." And really what happened was Debo had a wide open lane outside and cut inside in between Trent Williams and a guard and got tackled. And he tried to pin Debo missing an open lane on Trent Williams. And I remember, I think Brett Coleman was the one to retweet it and be like, "Dude, come on." And that's how I saw it, because he's an ass. I hate him. I really do.
He needs to be humbled real quickly.
Yeah. Like, I know I probably shouldn't be talking shit on beat writers considering I'm trying to get into a career of NFL journalism, but I don't think my paths are going to cross with Grant Cohn anytime soon, or that this is going to become relevant. But if it does, oh well, I'll stand by what I said. The dude's a bitch.
If Richard Sherman can get a job with Skip
That's
Bayless
true.
on Undisputed after saying what he said about a decade
That's
ago.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. You know, it's tough. Like like I've said, I love the Niners. I hope that's apparent by now. But Grant Cohn, no. Like I get it. Javon Kinlaw's been disappointing. I'm not going to disagree there. But I mean, there's a difference between, hey, maybe this guy hasn't panned out, and just berating him constantly. Like it's, especially as a professional. Like if he was a fan on Twitter, whatever. That's what they do. This guy's supposed to be like a pro that works closely with the team and is a representative for the team to like the media. It's not a good look.
Yeah.
But moving away from that tool and talking about the guys that the Niners kept around, I would say there's nobody here that jumps out at you in terms of name, but in terms of role, there's a couple important pieces here. Namely, Tashawn Gibson, who is the starter at safety, Bears legend, played very solid there and went to the Niners and played even better because that's how it works. If you play for the Niners, you're going to play better than you did on your last team. And then also Juwan Jennings, who is a very interesting piece where he's somebody that is almost more of a blocker at wide receiver that every once in a while will leak out and have some crazy long catch. Like the catch he had last year with Brock Purdy kind of led the ball weird and almost got his head taken off, but he still came down with it. Like Juwan Jennings is a dog. He's somebody
He's a dog.
He is quietly really good.
We call him Third and Juwan. He comes up clutch.
I love
downs.
that. That's awesome. I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
that's
He
fantastic.
comes up clutch. I love
sure.
Juwan Jennings.
And then a couple other guys, Kerry Hyder, who's a pretty solid rotational defensive end. Jake Brendel, who is the perfect center for this type of wide zone run scheme. Very quick, pretty underrated as a whole. And then some other names, Tabor Pepper, the long snapper. Defensive tackle Ty McGill, tight end Ross Dwelly, defensive tackle Kevin Givens, linebacker Demetrius Flanagan Fowles, which is one of the coolest names in the league. And then the aforementioned offensive tackle Colton McKivitz, who is currently listed as the starter at right tackle. But anyways, jumping over to the guys that the 49ers brought in. Very similar question for you, Brian. Who are you most excited to see play in a 49ers uniform next year out of the free agent acquisitions?
Javon Hargrave. I mean, hands down for me at least. I feel like the Niners defensive line was already scary as they were, but just adding another piece into that interior defensive line. We had a good rotation going on last year and in years before, but having Javon Hargrave just sort of reinforce that interior. We had Eric Armstead. I don't think he had a sack last year, but he made plays elsewhere and he was a great supporter. But having Javon Hargrave, I'm really excited to see what he brings and just sort of bolster this defensive line, make it even scarier than it already was.
You were right, by the way. Eric Armstead did not have a sack last year. He had two in the postseason, but in the regular season, he didn't have one.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't hear his name too much when it came to that, but I know he made plays in terms of...
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean...
yeah, Patrick, do you want to...
It's just Hargrave. Like, I'm not going to be over here saying, like, oh, man, I'm so excited to see Sam Darnold play. Like, no, I'm not. I mean, listen, to Darnold's credit, he hasn't had a good cast before, but, like, Javon Hargrave's Javon Hargrave.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not much more to say beyond that. This guy has been a bona fide stud. Even in Pittsburgh, he was a dog. Mm-hmm. Then he went to Philly. Never really got the recognition he deserves until now, finally.
Because he was on a contract year and everyone wanted him on their team, me included.
Yeah, but even, like, I had him as one of the top interior defensive linemen, not just last year, but the year before that. And it didn't seem like he was getting anywhere near the recognition he deserved until now, finally. Fletcher Cox is, like, kind of an old man at like, he still helps. Like, he's a starter. But
sure.
Javon Hargrave is, I don't want to exaggerate too much, but, like, 5 times the player Fletcher Cox is at this point.
Yeah. It's pretty safe to say. I mean, yeah, Hargrave is by far and away the most exciting player the Niners added this offseason period. I'll go that far. and like I said, we'll talk about their draft here in a moment, but looking at some of their other additions, John Feliciano, the interior offensive lineman, primarily plays guard. He's solid. Clelin Ferrell, who I think is a pretty interesting pickup for the 49ers. Obviously, he didn't pan out with the Raiders, right? He was the 4th overall pick in his draft class. Never
Mike
quite
Mayock 4th overall pick, so does it really count as a 4th overall
fair,
pick?
but still, he was taken in the top 5. A questionable pick then, didn't really pan out. But we've seen the Niners take guys like this before and absolutely cook with them. You look at guys like Arden Key, Maurice Hurst. Wouldn't shock me to see Clelin Ferrell be the next guy on that list. Like I said, there's got to be somebody that's going to step up opposite Bosa. Could be Ferrell, could be Drake Jackson, could just be Eric Armstead getting moved over. Whoever it is, the Niners defensive line is probably going to be pretty fucking good again. Isaiah Oliver, I know we were talking about the nickel situation. I think Isaiah Oliver is a pretty solid nickel, but I don't know what the Niners are looking to do there. That's a bit why it's more of a question for me, is just because I don't know if they like him. I don't know who they like. I don't know what they want to do, all that kind of stuff. And then the other free agents they brought in, Brandon Allen at quarterback, Matt Pryor, the offensive tackle, interior defensive lineman Austin Bryant, new kickers, Zane Gonzalez, Sam Darnold, obviously, cornerback Miles Hartsfield, and wide receiver Chris Conley. So not a huge free agent class, not a lot of notable names, but Javon Hargrave obviously was the big fish. They brought him in. He's somebody that can completely revitalize the defensive line and change it. Not that this is a defensive line that needed to revitalize, but they got a guy who can do it anyways. So then jumping over to the draft, wasn't a big draft. The Niners didn't pick until the 3rd round. So again, question more geared towards Bryant, but Patrick, I want to hear your thoughts as well. Who was your favorite pick that the 49ers made?
That's a good question. So I don't follow college football as much. So
Fair.
what happens after a draft is done is that's when I'd start diving into researching players.
To be
and
fair,
such.
that's what most people do. So
Yeah,
it's not like you're the only one, if that makes you feel any better.
that does make me feel better. But I'm just gonna go out on a limb here. I'm just gonna make maybe a wild pick here, but Jake Moody, third round kicker. He drilled 2 60-yarders in a practice session. I think it was yesterday or the day before. He's been really consistent. Losing Robbie Gould was obviously tough because he came up clutch for us on very, very important occasions.
He's good as gold, baby.
He's good as gold. Uncle Robbie. Lots of good memories with Robbie Gould, but losing him's tough, and the kicker position's really underrated because you seem to overlook them until it really matters, and they screw up, and that's when you're like,
I know that better than anybody. Yeah.
"Oh, I know. As a Bears fan, for you, yeah, I know. I'm so sorry."
It's okay. We're over it. We're moving on.
Yeah, and thankfully, before Robbie Gould, we had Phil Dawson, another veteran kicker who was pretty consistent himself. So throughout my tenure as a 49ers fan, I haven't really had to deal with a kicker situation like you Bears fans have. But
must be nice.
Yeah, it must be nice. So now losing Robbie, I feel like Jake Moody's going to have big shoes to fill in. But so far, it seems like he's going to step up to that role and not have us question, if we have a weakness at kicker or whatnot. Because we've had that luxury of not having to worry about that for many seasons now. So, yeah, my pick is Jake Moody.
So there's one pick for me that really stands out. And it was a later one. It was a 6th rounder. But you mentioned way earlier on this podcast, that the 49ers current linebacker coaching group
You son of a bitch.
Of course, me and you have the same thing. But the 49ers current linebacker coaching group is very, very good with these project guys, right? Ray Greenlaw is a perfect example. He wasn't drafted as like some safe prospect. But D. Winters from TCU is very, very similar to what Dre Greenlaw was.
Yep.
Really, the speed is unreal. Like, if you want to talk about elite speed at the linebacker position, that is what D. Winters has.
Ran a 4.49. Yep.
Yeah. And the physicality he brings. Overall, he is the total package in terms of physical aspects of being a good linebacker. You give that to this 49ers linebacker coaching staff, and just watch him eat, man. It'll take a little bit. The movement from a 4-3 to a 4-2-5 means it's going to take him longer to get on the field. But once he eventually does, oh man.
Mm-hmm. And look, here's the thing. I hate to even put it into existence, but it's the fact of the matter, right? There's a salary cap. Whether people want to admit it or not, there is one. And sometimes it's hard to keep everybody around. And if Dre Greenlaw, when it comes contract time, the Niners don't have the money to pay him, they've got the perfect replacement if he develops well. So this is a move to me that says, more for the future. I think it's a fantastic swing at somebody that could be that Dre Greenlaw replacement. So fuck you for taking my pick, but also yes, I love
in the
pick for
sixth
them.
round too.
Mm-hmm.
In the 6th round too. It's just such good.
I
value.
love taking late round linebackers.
Yeah, especially
like
ones with so much physical upside.
For sure. Because to me, when you have a late round pick at any position, it's going to be a scrappier guy. They're going to have to fight harder to get on the roster. And if there's one player that I want with a chip on their shoulder playing super scrappy and hungry, it's my linebackers. That is like the definition of what I want out of that position. So yeah, first round linebackers are cool, but late round linebackers have a special place in my heart. So I'm very excited to see what D Winters is going to do for them. Now, for me, if I had to pick somebody, I'm going to go with Darrell Luter Jr. out of South Alabama, the 5th round pick. He's somebody that I didn't watch before the draft. I do my own scouting. I watched a handful of these guys before the draft. Luter was somebody that went under the radar for me. But he's somebody that is very technically sound, pretty athletic, has good tape. And honestly, I think, we've been talking about the nickel corner. He completely escaped my mind until we got to the draft, if I'm being totally honest. He's somebody that I think day one could be competing for that spot. And he's somebody that I think, because, he's such a technically sound, intelligent player, could play pretty well there. And I know that's crazy to say about a 5th round pick, especially one from South Alabama, but crazier things have happened, right? This is a team that went to the playoffs in the NFC Championship game with Mr. Irrelevant. So if a 5th round corner starting next year, so be it, right? I'm running through some of their other picks. Jair Brown out of Penn State, someone I like a lot, but to me just looks like Talanoa Hufanga light, which sure is good to have as depth, good to have in case something were to happen to Hufanga, God forbid, knock on wood. But him as your first pick that you made is a little questionable for me. This is somebody that if he was available in like the 5th round, sure. But the first pick you have, I think you would have been better off going a different direction, especially because there were safeties that I liked more at this point, guys like Christopher Smith, Jordan Battle, J.L. Skinner, and they all complement Hufanga very well. So they'd be somebody that you'd be training up behind to Sean Gibson to eventually take over at the other safety spot. But either way, I can't complain too much about it. It's something that I was kind of harsh on when it first happened. As I've thought about it, I've kind of grown on it. Jake Moody, they needed a kicker. I don't like taking kickers high, but Moody, to my understanding, because I don't watch kicker film, I'm not going to lie to you, was the best one in the class. So cool. Cameron Latu, I didn't like, just a big old bucket of mid, if you ask me. Somebody that, isn't a good blocker, isn't a good pass catcher. He's just a guy.
So him being a bucket of mid, I feel like is fine because they kind of just want him out there for the occasional 12 personnel.
Sure.
Like, it's not,
fair.
I agree. There was higher upside guys available, but they kind of want someone that could just do a little bit of everything when they ask him to. They'll rotate him in every now and then. They drafted another tight end later on in the draft.
Who I think is better.
Better right now?
Yes.
Okay. So you're higher on him than me. But
yeah,
if you notice throughout even in free agency, they brought in another tight end. They were kind of stacking up on tight ends, and they just want to see which one works out the best. And I feel like Latu is the, I guess, is the benchmark, right? I think that's
they brought him in because they want to see where their other tight ends stack up. If they're better than Latu, they make the roster. If they don't, they get cut. Perfect. Yeah, that's what we're spending draft picks on. Another 5th round pick they made, Robert Beal Jr., the edge rusher out of Georgia. This was early for me. Like I had a 7th round grade on him. They took him in the 5th, but like he's a good rotational guy. He's pretty quick. He's really good on stunts. So it at least makes sense for their scheme. I can see why they'd like him more than I did. Braden Willis, like I said, I think is better than Latu. I like his hands better. I like him as a blocker a lot more. Because he's a good move blocker. He's a lot more Kittle-esque as a blocker. So I like what he brings to the table. Ronnie Bell, just a stereotypical like 5th, 6th receiver, especially for Shanahan, because he's somebody that's a good athlete that can run crossers really well, and that's going to help them. That's something that Shanahan really likes in his offense, his routes. He likes crossing routes. Just inconsistent hands, got hurt last year, that type of thing. And then Jalen Graham, another developmental linebacker. This guy more of a safety, played safety in college, and probably a solid special teamer. So overall, not my favorite draft class, but I at least see the vision with most of their picks, right? I can see why they'd be higher on some guys than maybe I was and things like that. So I can't hate it too much. But jumping off of that and kind of wrapping us up here, last question, it's a 2-parter. What are your expectations for this team next year in terms of record? You know, you can give me a straight up record prediction or a floor and a ceiling or however you want to do that. And then who are you most excited to watch next year?
So let's start off with the player that I'm very excited to watch this upcoming year. That's going to be Brandon Ayuk. People have been calling for his breakout for a few seasons now, but I feel like this is really the season that he might take it to the next level. He's getting a lot of high praise from Debo, coaching staff. And he's working really hard. And like other people have mentioned, he's sort of the more pure wide receiver on this team. I'm not saying that Debo is incapable of, acting as our as another route running wide receiver, which he's also good at. But Debo is also there for our special, screens, bubble screens, run after catch. That's what he excels at. But Brandon Ayuk and his route running is what really stands out to me and stands out to a lot of fans. And I feel like I'm high on him for a breakout season. I think last season was his first 1,000-yard season. He had, quote me if I'm wrong, but probably 7 or 8 touchdowns. And he showed glimpses of being great. So I'm very excited to see him. And in terms of a season prediction, that's tough. I don't know if I can say like a record or whatnot, but I will say that the Super Bowl window is slowly closing. And I feel like that's something I'm concerned about because we have a lot of players, great players that are playing their best ball right now. And we've been to the NFC Championship 3 times in the last 4 or so years. We made a Super Bowl appearance in the 2019-2020 season, and we've come up short every single time. So I'm sure the players are frustrated, the fans are frustrated, and this sort of window where our best players are playing their best ball is sort of closing, and we might risk losing them to free agency and whatnot. Some players are getting much older, so I feel like if this isn't the season that, we make it to the Super Bowl, win the Super Bowl, then the years after are going to be really difficult to claw back at. So I have high hopes for this season. I feel like this isn't a make or break season yet, but that window is closing, and I feel like I have high hopes. That's what I'm trying to say. I have high hopes for the season, and I sure as hell hope that this year could be it.
Bryan, you were the most diplomatic guest I have had on this show yet, and I got to tell you, I love and appreciate it. Absolutely. Everyone else is either, we're Super Bowl or bust, or God, this team sucks. You're very much like, there could be a wide variety of things that could happen, but I have high hopes, and I love it. I love it.
On that spectrum, out of curiosity,
you're in the basement. You don't have a real team. You're on your own spectrum. Real quick, just before Patrick gives his spiel, I want to throw out there I'm not going to say breaking 49ers news, but something that just came out, and I find this really funny and very topical. Apparently today at some point, Kyle Shanahan confirmed that had the 49ers won the NFC Championship last year and went to the Super Bowl, he was going to call Phillip Rivers and ask him to come out of retirement and play in the Super Bowl.
I heard about that, yeah.
I think that is hilarious. Imagine you're chilling on your couch with your 9 kids, and Kyle Shanahan calls up and says, "Hey, buddy, you want to win a ring?" That's cold. I love it.
Quarterback battle of the century: Phillip Rivers versus Patrick Mahomes. in
I mean, hey.
2023.
I would have enjoyed it.
I
Could have
mean,
been a possibility.
it could
All he
have.
has to do is game manage. It's not like he had to be great.
Definitely would have
The
done
guy,
better
the
than
guy,
Josh
the
Johnson.
guy has not played ball in like a year.
Okay, who are you taking, Josh Johnson or Phillip Rivers in 2022?
Josh Johnson, having played football and going through a training camp for the entire year against Phillip Rivers, who was retired, taking
This
care
guy
of
with his
9 kids.
logic. You're not fun or spontaneous, Patrick. Live a little.
Okay. So change up pitch. We pull up Johnny Manziel.
Hurt even better. Are you kidding?
Love that.
He's topical.
Beautiful.
Now. He's topical.
Go get Tebow. Fuck it.
Uh,
You'll have the power of God and fullbacks on your side. You'd be unstoppable.
Oh my god! I at first the joke took like a second or two to click with the.
How? That's like the one thing Tebow's known for.
No, I know
That
Tebow
and
for doing
beating the
original
Steelers.
RPO.
Oh, okay, fair. This guy in his college football.
Well, no, not even like, or I guess it was college ball. I don't even know if that was the original RPO, but you know what I'm talking about.
I don't remember.
He
Listen,
would get
when I
the direct snap and then read like a fade while running forward, and if he likes it, he'll throw it while
okay,
running.
I see what you mean. Yeah. See,
Was
my
that
memory of
an
how that
RPO? I don't-
offense was. My memory of how that offense functioned is kind of hazy, considering I was like 9, and
Well-
I didn't know what the fuck X's and O's were. But you know, it's neither
I just
here
know
nor
people call it the Tebow. Is that not? When it's just a
there.
QB
I've never
sneak
heard it called
or a
that.
QB dive when they're reading like a fade and they jump and throw it sometimes.
I mean, that sounds like the most Tebow thing I've ever heard because all he had was a strong arm and good legs. So sure, makes
And
sense.
the worst throwing motion that made Phillip Rivers go full circle.
Tebow should have played fullback. End of story. Anyways, Patrick, expectations for the 49ers.
What are
Go.
you, Urban Meyer? 11-6. I have them.
ooh.
Hold on. We're not going to gloss over that. Don't you dare come on my show and call me Urban Meyer, you little punk. Who the fuck do you think you are? He wanted to put Tebow at tight end. Fuck tight ends. I want more fullbacks.
Well,
Except George Kittle.
The point is you're
Much
expecting
respect
him
to George
block,
Kittle.
just like Meyer did.
I'm not expecting him to block. I'm expecting him to be a pass catcher.
Pass catch only fullback? That's new for you.
He's Andrew Beck.
Well, I didn't think that you were fine with that. That's new. I
I'm
always
not, but if it's, I'll make an exception for Tebow. Okay.
Okay. Do it for
If it-
God.
Exactly.
God's fullback.
God's fullback is Kyle Juszczyk. Anyways.
So 11-6 for me. And then my big play that I'm excited to watch was I went offensive tackle the past 2 times I was here, so I'm not going to go Trent Williams. I don't think I would anyway.
Boring.
Boring?
Yeah, everyone loves offensive tackle talk.
Penny Sue? Oh, I thought that you were saying boring to go with him. Okay.
I'm saying to
My
not
bad.
go with him.
Well, I don't think I would go with him anyway because I just love Hufanga.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That is a justifiable.
I'm
other
actually
option.
pissed because I wanted to make one of my TikToks where I do like a film analysis on Hufanga, but
Mhm.
I went over how my Wi-Fi is terrible here because I was watching 49ers film for this, obviously, and
Mhm.
I was thinking, oh, why not kill 2 birds with 1 stone? I'll make a TikTok talking about Hufanga, going over his film and everything. And the problem was I could like the Wi-Fi is spotty, right? So I'll get the all 22 up, I'll watch it, but then it will randomly like stop working.
Mm.
So I ended up going outside and watching the film, but I'm not going to record a video right in my front yard. So yeah, instead I was just by myself, not making a video, not making content, but I still loved what I saw from Hufanga, whether I was able to make a video on it or not. In fact, I might visit the 49ers film again just to go over that Hufanga film because, man,
You certainly should.
Hufanga, I love how you compared him to Palomalu because I couldn't tell if I was just saying that because long hair, but he does legitimately play like Palomalu. It
Yeah.
isn't just the hair.
Well, I mean, he
is-
was literally mentored by Polamalu throughout the summer last year. It makes sense.
Yeah, he plays this brand of football that reminds me of like Jamal Adams when he was on the Jets. Like
Sure.
really physical, willing to make absolute blows on the wide receivers, tight ends, whoever is trying to receive the ball. And when I say try, I mean trying, because it's not going to be easy to catch a ball with 29 on the field. All right.
Sure.
Hufanga is a stud. He is. He covers so much ground, just a hard hitter. He does really everything that you would like to see from a safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. As for me, record-wise, I'm going to give you a floor and a ceiling. Floor, I would say about 7 or 8 wins, and that's if the Purdy experiment fails, and they're scrambling to figure out what to do at quarterback. Ceiling, you have a defense that I think is still going to be elite. You're going to have probably a top 5 run game in football. Again, maybe the best run game in football. We'll have to see. You have fantastic weapons, fantastic coaching. And if Purdy's playing the exact same way he did last year, you have a quarterback that is, at the very least, a very capable game manager and an offense that only needs a capable game manager, to operate. So I think 13 wins isn't crazy to say for a ceiling, maybe even 14, because the NFC sucks. That's no secret. Their division, not very good. You have the Cardinals, you have the Rams, who we don't know what's going on with them, especially at quarterback. And then the Seahawks, they're volatile, right? Because I
They're
love Geno
scary.
Smith. They're absolutely scary. But if Geno Smith reverts, which I'm not saying is going to happen, but it is possible.
Sure.
If Geno Smith reverts, they're not as scary, right?
Would you say that that's more or less likely than CMC and the other injury-prone players on the 49ers going down, though? Because I feel like if you're
Ooh.
going to say worst-case scenario for the Seahawks, which that is, then you
Right.
got to say the worst-case
That's
scenario
fair.
for
Okay.
San Fran.
Yeah, I still think worst case scenario, even if those guys go down, it's 6 to 7 wins. Like they're so deep at every position, and the
Sure.
offense can function. Like, sure, CMC, Debo, all those guys make that offense better, but it can still function without them. Like Brian brought
Yeah.
up very early on, how good their running back depth is. And sure, having Elijah Mitchell as your lead back now takes away the ability to motion him out wide and have him run a double move and, completely juke a corner out of his shoes, but he can still catch the football out of the backfield and be decently effective, and he's still one of the better pure runners in football. So, 6, 7 wins as a floor, 13, 14 wins as a ceiling, I think is very reasonable for the 49ers. They'll probably end up somewhere around 11, 12 wins. With that being said, player I'm most excited to watch, I've been waiting episodes and episodes and episodes to say this, is Kyle Juszczyk. I know that's my basic answer, but I don't care. He is my favorite player not currently rostered by the Chicago Bears, and I like him more than a lot of Bears players even. And by the way, I had a tweet pop up mid-recording. I didn't want to bring it up until Juszczyk became relevant again, even though he's always relevant. I didn't want to have to change the subject. Connor Hayward is a fullback tight end that the Pittsburgh Steelers currently have employed, and it's kind of between him and one of their linemen to play fullback this year. So Connor Hayward's brother, the great Cam Hayward, said recently that he thinks Connor Hayward should start studying Kyle Juszczyk to better prep himself for what he needs to do in Pittsburgh. If that is not a beautiful example of everything I was trying to say earlier about Juszczyk being the future of the position, then I don't know what is. Because if we have NFL players actively encouraging their family that are playing fullback to study Juszczyk, then it's very clear that I'm not the only one who thinks he's what every player at that position needs to be going forward. Or ideally what they will be. But all that being said, I think that about wraps us up here. If you guys want to plug anything, you're more than welcome to. Floor is yours.
Don't forget to check out that podcast that I talked about earlier.
The Athletic
if you are
Podcast,
more
yeah.
interested. Yeah. It's just called The Play Callers. Play Callers, one word. And then for my content, my podcast, the space goal, space line, space podcast, the Goal Line Podcast. I have Miller on occasion. I have many other guests. I consistently put out episodes every week there. At No Huddle NFL, no capitals and no spaces. It's right there on the screen. on TikTok and Instagram at nohuddlenfl with an underscore at the end for not Twitter. I did this last time. X, which is still with Terry, at nohuddlenfl. Still no capitals and no spaces with an underscore at the end. And yeah, Brian, if you want to plug your stuff.
I'm not. I don't have
Yeah.
my own podcast. I don't have none of that. I'm just your average casual fan, so I have nothing to plug in. All
And
I
we
have to
love
say
him for
is,
it.
yeah, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here. I definitely learned a lot.
I'm
New
glad.
perspectives, deep football knowledge from you two, which I greatly appreciate. Gives a whole nother perspective as a fan. It was fun to be on here, and yeah. And if I had to leave off with one more thing, if the
By
Niners
all
could just
means.
stay healthy, execute their game plan. Let's say in the scenario that people get hurt, next man up mentality. This is a good team that is perfectly capable of winning the Super Bowl. So I'll just leave it at that.
I completely
Absolutely.
agree there. The injury, that's the concern.
Yeah,
I've loved hearing your perspective just as a fan, right? I always think it's
Yeah.
great what Miller does bringing these fans on because they understand it at such a deeper level than me being someone that isn't a fan of a particular team. I don't have I almost feel like I'm a robot saying this. I don't have these emotional drivings towards motives teams. And I kind of try and put myself in the shoes of fan bases, but of course I can't. So I loved hearing your perspective on some of the moves they made, not just this season, but also in the past, right? We talked about what Trey Lance did or the move for Trey Lance earlier. I really liked hearing that from you. So don't twist
I
it as if
appreciate
we
it.
were
Thank
the
you.
only ones. Yeah.
No, not at all. I think it was great to talk football. I learned a ton. I got to be honest with you. I learned a ton.
I'm glad.
So,
That makes me happy.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But like I said, that wraps us up. Definitely make sure to check out all my links down below. You can find my Twitter, my Instagram, my TikTok, all that good stuff at Miller Football or Miller Football _ everywhere. Also, I have my own podcast, Run the North. We post weekly. It's a NFC North fan podcast, but we talk about everything. I promise. We're not just talking about the NFC North every week. So definitely make sure to check those out. There's links to that in the description, as well as a playlist that should have the rest of my team previews in there if you want to check any of those out. By the time the season starts on September 7th, if I'm not mistaken, early September, I will have covered all 32 NFL teams in depth in videos. Maybe not quite as long as this one, but over an hour for every single team. But all that being said, please make sure to like and subscribe down below. Helps out a ton. And to everyone out there watching, as well as the two lovely gentlemen who joined me here today, I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, night, afternoon, whatever time of day for you. I hope you enjoy it because you're all wonderful people and you deserve it.